Hello, I am Dr. Hannah L. Bianchi, and I'm a history professor at Howard Community College, and I'm more than happy to answer your questions about the Vietnam War. But I should mention that I have my doctorate in British history, so I never really studied the Vietnam War in graduate school. But of course, I teach about the Vietnam War in my world history classes because it's such a huge and significant event in the 20th century. So your first question was about the impact of the Vietnam War on society, public opinion, and politics during the time period. And it had a huge impact on society. Perhaps if you remember, 10 years ago or so, when we were gearing up for the war in Iraq, there was some protests. And this was very, very minor compared to what was going on in the late 1960s. All right, the anti-war movement wasn't just some political protest. It was actually a cultural movement. Okay, so there was anti-war music festivals. There was anti-war movies. Okay, it really became a really important part of that generation's, particularly the young generation's, identity. Okay, and also you have to combine this with, you can't separate it with what's going on with race relations during the time period, with the generational revolt. And so just the late 60s in general was a very, very, I guess, a time full of riots and protests across urban areas and also on college campuses. And Columbia University students really took over the university, shut it down. There's also the famous example of Kent State University, where the students were protesting against the existence of a ROTC building, and um, the Ohio National Guard was called in, and they shot at the students, and several students were killed. So the anti-war protest was just more than a political protest; it was actually a cultural movement. Okay, public opinion of the war dropped dramatically, and I really think that there's, I think, three main reasons why that's the case. The first is this is I guess, the first war that's really televised. Right, so World War II really wasn't televisions. It wasn't invented, but most people didn't really have it in their home yet. The Korean War is still too early, but by the Vietnam War, everybody's got a TV. You can turn in to the nightly news and you can watch what's going on, and you see Americans getting killed. Okay, and it's pretty shocking. It's pretty shocking. There's this distance between war and the home front, and I think the television kind of collapses that separation. And so that was one reason. The second reason is it was a draft, right? Um, we've been fighting in the Middle East for some time now, but I think the reason why there isn't people forget about it actually, because there's no draft. People sign up that want to go to the war. Okay, casualties are fairly low compared to what we're experiencing in Vietnam, and there's a tendency of a lot of Americans just to forget that we are at war. All right, but imagine if there's a draft and it's likely that you, just regular college-age student, um, could be selected to go to Vietnam and experience some really horrible, horrible experiences, perhaps even die. And so this factor really figured into public opinion. That's one reason why it was just dropping as it progressed. It was also, and the third reason, a lot longer. I think most wars are. We always think, oh, it's going to be over in a couple months. We were this great, powerful country. Who's North Vietnam? We defeated the Nazis. We defeated the Japanese. We can defeat them. And in reality, it kind of dragged on. I think really an important turning point, if you're studying this in more detail, is the Tet Offensive, 1968. Kind of thought we were at the cusp of victory, that North Vietnam was about to collapse, and then they launched this major offensive. It was not tactically very successful, but it showed that they weren't about to surrender, and that scared a lot of people. So really, the length and lack of success also resulted in a drop in public opinion. And it really impacted politics. Lyndon B. Johnson won in a landslide in 1964. Democrats seemed to be the majority party. And then 1968, the Democratic Party is really torn over the war. Lyndon B. Johnson, the sitting president, drops from running for the nomination of his own party, which is really quite astounding, because usually a sitting president always gets the nomination of his party, but he drops out. He's just beat by the war, and you can see this in his speeches. You can see it in just the way he looks and his health. And as a result, Nixon wins. And so you have a Republican president. And it's odd that the Republican is kind of associated with the anti-war movement, and that historically, actually, the Republicans were more isolationist than the Democrats. But obviously, that's changed in the last generation or so. Okay, so there's a political shift in play as well, and huge protest at the Democrat National Convention in 1968, which is, you can watch the videos online, and it's just really quite astounding. The level of the protest and the level of the angst and the youth of this time period. So your second question was going to war seen as something heroic, all right, morally wrong, or neither, and how so? And the short answer is people really didn't want to go to war. Okay, the war was not popular, and you can just see this in the statistics. Over 500,000 people kind of dodged the draft, refused to go, and then another 500,000 had less than honorable discharges. So when they got over there, or their military training, they refused to fight, they refused to train, and they're kicked out of the military. So people really did not view this as something heroic. They didn't want to go over there. They didn't want to experience the war. They didn't know why they were fighting. And you can also see this in that some of the soldiers started committing atrocities against the Vietnamese people. Excuse me. There's also the practice of fragging, which is when enlisted individuals would kill their officers and refuse to go fight. And there are several hundred incidences where that happened. So you see the whole breakdown of the military hierarchy and military command structure, and that just some of the young people that have been drafted into the war really don't want to be there. They don't want to fight. They don't want to listen to the officers. And so it was a huge problem. When people came back, it's not like today. There wasn't parades. There weren't people clapping. They weren't remembered at events. There wasn't this great celebration of the military. I mean, I think we make a great distinction that you can oppose the war, but you can still support the military. That distinction wasn't really in play during the Vietnam era. All right, so this anti-war kind of sentiment played out, and resentment and lack of support for the military. And also, the war was very difficult. A lot more death, a lot more casualties. You're fighting guerrilla-style warfare. There's no really clear distinction between good guys, bad guys. And they come back with a lot of mental disorders, and there isn't the support that we have today. So it was horrible all around, basically, for those that went to Vietnam in the process of being kind of brought back into American society. So not a lot of positive things there. Now, your third question is, why was this war only between the United States and Vietnam? And that's not entirely true. I think you need to see the whole context of the war, and you need to study the Cold War in general to understand Vietnam. And the reason why we're there was a containment theory that we should keep communism contained, and then it will collapse from within. So if communism spreads to a new area, we've got to go and fight there. It's related to the Truman Doctrine as well, that we're going to send money and military support to those fighting for democracy and freedom. It's tied to the domino effect. You think that one country in Southeast Asia is going to fall, the rest, Laos and Cambodia, will also fall to communism. It's also a proxy war. Okay, it's not a war between Vietnam and the United States. The main communist powers during this time period are China and the Soviet Union, and they're the real target of the Vietnam War. All right, and on the flip side, it's not really about South Vietnam. We're kind of dragging them along. Okay, it's really about the United States and our beliefs. And so we see this, I guess, theoretically in the way I just explained it, but we also see it practically in the fact that China sends soldiers, it sends military aid, it sends money. Russia, at least initially, also sends a lot of military hardware to North Vietnam. So we're fighting, against maybe the Vietnamese in the north, but they're going to be armed by the Chinese, and they're going to be armed by the Soviets. The same thing in the south. Obviously the United States plays a huge role. We have our South Vietnamese allies. Surprisingly, a lot of Koreans, a lot of South Koreans come, several 100,000 South Koreans come and aid the Americans. We also see other countries in the region that are fearful of the spread of communism, such as Australia sending supplies, New Zealand, I think, as well, sending some men and supplies. And we get also a lot of moral support from our allies in Britain, in Canada. Even though they're not directly involved, they're our allies, and they're supporting the United States. So it's far more complicated than just, North Vietnam versus the United States. The only way you really want to, I guess, really can understand the Vietnam War is if you see the context of the Cold War and it being a proxy war between these major players, the United States, the Soviet Union, and China. And the only way really to win the war in Vietnam is to attack China, perhaps cut off the aid. But then that would bring in some, I guess, start World War III. Nobody wanted to do that. If we attacked, Soviet Union and China, they would perhaps launch nuclear weapons, and we have nuclear weapons, of course. At this time, we had them before, obviously, the Russians did. And it could result in the end of humanity. So nobody wants this to escalate. So that's why it remained a proxy war, but at the same time, they're constantly being funneled weapons, supplies, and men from these major players, and we can't stop that. So it's a huge hurdle. We're fighting with like one hand tied behind our back. And I guess that relates to the length of the war and the fact that we couldn't have a clear victory. So I hope that these responses help illuminate the war for you a little bit and clarify certain things. And good luck on the rest of your project.